My name is Michael Boughn, and I am the author of Great Canadian Poems for the Aged, Volume 1, Illustrated Edition. It occurred to me that, my Canada is a Canada that most people now no longer know. They don't know it, right? So in the midst of this ongoing ridiculous question about what is Canadian identity, or is there a Canadian identity, the fact is that there's this Canada that we all have that's varied and different and constantly changing and full of new stuff and old stuff all the time. And I wanted to try to use some of it's mine, some of it's gathered from various other sources. But I wanted to use that experience of a Canada that is gone in some sense as a ground for a writing project. There's a lot of poems in the book about identity. There's The Mad Trapper of Rat River. There's the one about Grey Owl Goes AWOL. There's Great White North. All those poems engage that question attempt to engage it on some level. In some ways, Canada is the least stereotyped place that one could imagine. In reality, it's made up of people from so many different places who bring so much with them. And it's constantly, as a culture and as a place, it's constantly finding ways to integrate that material and change it and turn it into some new experience. So that's the thing I love most about Canada. But at the same time, there's a kind of lingering angst about this identity question that I just find so hilarious in some sense. Maybe it's because I was born in the States and spent the first 20 years of my life in the States where that's not ever a question, right? But I suppose in some sense the fact that it's a continual question is in and of itself a defining feature of what in fact is the Canadian identity, which is that we are constantly asking that question. And there's no answer. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a complicated answer, which is that we are, in fact, we're not a multicultural place, we're a heterocultural place, which is to say we have a culture that's not singular. It's actually made up of so many different elements that never resolve themselves into some singular notion that you could call an identity. So it's heterocultural experience as opposed to a uniculture or a monoculture or even a multiculture where you've got lots of distinct identities together. We're something different and new in the world. We need to recognize that. It came to me in a moment after I had finished my last book, Cosmographia, which, because Cosmographia was written during the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the war that followed from that, it was deeply concerned with issues of American identity and the kinds of destructive events that flow out of that. So when I finished that, I felt suddenly like, wow, there's a lot of American stuff in this book. And I want to write a Canadian book. So what am I going to write? Well, then I decided to write Great Canadian Poems for the Ages. Okay, I can do that. The S got dropped and turned into a D, partly at the suggestion of David McFadden, but in fact it was a an apropos. I mean, the change was good. It worked out, I think. I mean, we haunted used bookstores as kids, right? There are no, I mean, there aren't used bookstores anymore. If there are, they're not haunted by students. There are very few of them. But when you were haunting those bookstores, always in the poetry section, there would be anthologies from the 19th century, great American poems, or the great poems of 1898, and they would be illustrated editions, and there would be some picture on the cover. And you would look at these books, and they invoked a particular moment. So I decided that once I had the title, I came up with the idea of making it an illustrated edition and volume. I don't know if it's actually volume 1 or not. There may be a volume 2. I suppose I could go to a volume 2. I am an immigrant to Canada, and when I came here in 1966. So my experience of Canada has grown out of that particular moment of coming here as a naive 20-year-old who knew very little about Canada at the time. I was fleeing the FBI and the Vietnam War. And one of the first images that met me when I hitchhiked up to Vancouver was the picture on the cover of the book of the Doukhobor woman who was burning down her house, naked, burning down her house. And when I saw that, I thought, oh my God, where am I? Anyway, when I was considering writing a book of specifically Canadian poems, that image came back to me. We used to hitchhike back and forth across Canada at the drop of a hat, right? And somebody said, okay, let's go to Montreal. And you'd head out and stick out your thumb, and then you'd meet people in Winnipeg that were on their way to Toronto, and then you'd bump into them 4 weeks later in Montreal, and then 2 months after that, you'd all end up in a party in Vancouver together. And those days, one of the dread places on the beaten path across Canada was Wawa. Because the Wawa, if you got dropped off at the Wawa Goose, you could end up spending possibly the rest of your life there before someone picked you up. It was famous in terms of the folklore of the desperation of hitchhikers who'd been left there, their names scrawled on the... So anyway, I wanted to do a poem about the goose and about Wawa, and the vortexes came into the poem, and then, as you know, Wyndham Lewis was the editor of a magazine called Vortex, and so Wyndham Lewis got into the poem too. The Mad Trapper of Rat River, which has a picture of the Mad Trapper of Rat River. This is his death photo, actually. The RCMP, he's wrapped in some kind of tarp, and his face is locked in some kind of rictus grin. The Mad Trapper of Rat River. Most people engaged in either extraordinary chase associated with normal forms of etiquette or some other enforcement of regular outcomes will find the whole thing impaled on assumptions of closure's infinite grace. The names have been eliminated to perform evasions of severe paralysis arising from expectations of a statutory denouement where Rosemary rides to the rescue claiming divine inspiration. Failure to declare appropriate test results in issues of further objections, but when distances return time to previously infested untenable nicks, regulatory horsemen enter, ready to shock the recognition of alien IDs into writhing unknown figures on the floor of cagey interruptions. Never knowing his name is a state associated with actual disorientation, which often resembles visual deregulation as it emerges in landscapes notable for white. Tracks lead into deep instants, accumulated, drifting, and then just as quickly are gone, trailing nothing in the most emphatic of gestures. Madness then indicates a certain willingness to walk into it. It's not that walking into it is not the same walking into it as this morning, but knowing that returns to another time. Last seen in Dufferin Grove Park is another instance of horsemen in doubt about the possibility of always getting things to be what has been known to be required pursuant to knowledge that all avenues of egress commandeer Great White North and Jimmy Stewart from other poems, subdividing the arrival lounge into trackable versions of otherwise disparate evasions of fading renewal. Great White North. Ishmael's whale could barely hold a sperm candle to the hump of that sudden thought, spreading out in undulating arguments of vast, intemperate, breached limits. Lack of definition is the name game that brings extensions of shadowless defiance to destinies of vague, wrapped-up national yearnings characters fold into thought of eventual glory. Mad trapper prophecies fall into all too scrutable renditions of what, after all, is just a moment of singular syllabic kinetics, though phonemic proliferation undoes any meager hope for regular fixes, opening the limit in ways infinitely intimate adjustments of weather lead to song. H.D.'s intensity was rooted in concatenations of etched words thinking against white field. Supine reckonings of clarities, a perpetual whine of overworked moral engines in the vineyards of broad human endeavors toward continuous dispersion, lurid of displays in moose-like vocalic excretions, wage war on everything with all the light subject positions yearn to bring midnight to sun's evasive yet ample declaration that bookish has yielded it rethinking of extended dimensions, leaving them flopping for want of a decent milieu. It's green around here now, and yellow lilies have popped, but white still lounges in eyes' propensity to cling to distant references to all too common senses of origins wild busting out beyond Emerson's world we think up again into old heart, but as if it has to begin just there in that utterly blank exfoliation and chiseled nada, indicating truth and beauty out on the town, unable to keep their hands off each other as a sign of possible inroads by ancient breaches in hills formerly known as too solicitous extensions into geographies of thought.